So what we're going to take a little look at now is our CONVIO Flex settings. Now, these settings are only available to us on our CONVIO Flex cutter bars, and these are the various modes that are controlling that of our CONVIO Flex. The way we access the CONVIO Flex settings are if we go into front attachments parameters, come down, and here we can see our auto contour or automatic flex mode. We have 4 modes available to us here at class for our CONVIO Flex settings. We can see we have grain, which is our rigid CONVIO setting, flex manual, laid crops, and then auto flex. And I'm going to take you through each of these modes and how we're going to set up our CONVIO to gain the best out of them. If I have my CONVIO in the grain mode, this means my CONVIO is working off the sensor bands fitted underneath the machine. It is not using any flex formats. It is purposely just using the auto contour bars underneath the machine and works the same way a conventional Vario or conventional CONVIO would work. So in the grain mode, I still have 2 presets for my auto contour settings, which I can flick between, so be that my first setting and my second setting. Again, I can save and load these settings the same way as I would on my auto contour menu. I can then go in and load my second setting, which I'm going to talk about, which is my laid crop setting. Now, to do this, I need to disengage that of my front cutter bar. I then need to select laid crop setting. And here now I've selected laid crop setting, we can see our auto contour menu has actually changed. We can see now we have a small black arrow on our auto contour bar. Effectively, what this mode is used for is obviously, as it says in the name, for laid crops. If we have a field with a large amount of standing crops, I can flick between rigid and flex on the move. So for example, if I'm cutting nice standing crops, I can have my auto contour in setting 1. However, if I then come to some laid crops on the floor, I can then flick my auto contour to setting 2, which is below the black arrow, and this is then going to go into flex mode. We'll see the cutter bar itself start to flex the knife. So if I lift the reel out of the way, we can see this working as I'm going through the modes. If I then make sure I've selected the likes of laid crop mode, I will then engage that of my front cutter bar. And here I can see I've got my 2 auto contour settings. Now, my first auto contour setting is below that of 18. So the value of 18, it's below 18 and 0, which means I have now gone to flex setting. We can see the actual cutter bar knife, the knife across the entirety of the cutter bar, is now flexing with the contour of the ground. And we know this because we can see the icon on the auto contour button has also changed. We can see it's now gone to a ground pressure flex setting. I then can save my second setting above any value of 18, above 18, effectively above that of the black arrow. And when I flick to this setting, we will see our auto contour mode change, and we will see our cutter bar change from flex into rigid knife. So we'll see this outside the machine now when I flick from flex setting to then auto contour standard rigid mode. We can see that cutter bar knife become rigid again. So in the scenarios where we're cutting nice standing crops, we can run it as a rigid knife. However, on the go, if I then need to flex down and I need to get under some laid crop, I can then flick it to my second setting, my auto contour, and we can see the cutter bar knife itself has now gone into flex mode because the icon itself has changed, and we can see that the actual cutter bar knife itself has changed too. So again, we need to ensure that our auto contour setting has saved correctly, that is between that of 0 and 18 if we want it to flex, or anywhere above 18 or above the black arrow if we want the cutter bar to become rigid. The next setting we're going to look at is our flex settings. Now, if I come back to my front attachment, we've already seen the first 2 modes. We can also see we have a flex manual mode and an auto flex mode. Now, the difference between the 2 modes is the way the cutter bar is flexing with that of the feeder house. If I have flex manual selected, it means only my cutter bar knife is flexing with the contour of the ground. It is flexing at all times, and it is using the hydraulic ground pressure to adapt itself for that of the contour of the ground. However, my feeder house is not moving. My feeder house is rigid, only my knife is moving in its manual mode. Now, predominantly here in the UK, we tend to use the setting for auto flex. Auto flex is moving both my cutter bar knife and my feeder house accordingly to try and cut at the lowest point at all times. So if I select auto flex, I then re-engage my cutter bar. We can see that the cutter bar is still in its flexible mode. If I then lift the cutter bar up, so to a pre-select setting, we will see the cutter bar knife then go from a flexible setting into a rigid setting. So we can see that full cutter bar knife becoming rigid again when we've lifted it up out of the air, be that on the headland. This makes sure that there's no debris or any crop left over on the cutter bar knife when we've lifted on the headland. When we then go back down into auto contour mode, all I do is click my auto contour button once, and my cutter bar is back to flex. We can see that knife flexing with the contour of the ground. And again, if I see on my auto contour menu, I know I'm in auto contour flex because my automatic menu has come up with an A, and we can see the flex icon shown. So I can still pre-select 2 saved heights for my reel. However, my knife is only taking hydraulic ground pressure. We do have a setting available for our auto contour and our flex setting too. So if I go into my front attachment menu and go up to settings of my front attachment, here I can see a pre-saved factory setting for the pressure allowance on the ground. In certain scenarios, we do need to adjust the pressure setting accordingly to maybe gain a little bit more flex from our cutter bar knife. Then we can increase and decrease that pressure setting. So again, we can see that auto flex setting using. If I then lift my cutter bar once again, we can see the cutter bar knife is raised. It is coming back to its standard position of a rigid mode. We can see the knife itself flexing back to rigid, which then keeps the cutter bar nice and tidy when we're lifting on the headlands. However, when I then go back to my flex setting by clicking my auto contour button, I can now see my cutter bar going back into that flex mode. This mode is very, very useful for cutting very close to the ground at all times. It's not just using the cutter bar knife, but it's moving the feeder house accordingly too. So as I move my cutter bar up and down, or as my cutter bar is moving up and down with the undulation of the ground, my feeder house is also moving up and down, so it's maintaining that very, very low cutting angle. I can still reverse that of my feeder house and my main auger if I require to when in the field. To do this, all I need to do is reverse the cutter bar the same way I would a conventional cutter bar, by pushing away from me on the front attachment button and pressing the reverse button at the same time. Here I can see my main central auger is reversing, my feeder house is reversing, and my central belt is reversing. So again, if I potentially caused any blockage in the center, I can still reverse all of these settings out manually with the cutter bar stopped. I do also have some learning parameters that I need to be aware of, especially for that of my CONVIO cutter bar. If I go to my front attachment menu and come down to learning procedures, I can see all the standard cutter bar features that we would see on any of our conventional cutter bars. I can see that I need to learn that of my front attachment height, my reel height, my positioning, my cross level control, and my cutting angle. These are all learning parameters which we need to do on the LEXION regardless of the cutter bar itself. So here I can see my learning procedures. So again, these are the learning procedures we're doing at the beginning of the season or midway through the season to ensure that our combine and our cutter bar are communicating effectively, and to make sure that our cutter bar settings are being loaded in correctly to our combine. So effectively a learning parameter for our combine to learn. But with also CONVIO, we can see that we need to learn the speeds of the conveyor belts too. So what this process does is it speeds the belts up, both the side belts and the center belts, and it allows the combine to determine how fast those belts are going so that it can make the correct adjustments when we're making them through the CEBIS screen. We do at class recommend doing this multiple times per season to ensure accuracy of the system is at its utmost. So now we can see that I've learnt my speed parameters. We can see those side belts stop, and then all the speeds are learnt up accordingly from this. So here we can see all of our CONVIO settings which can be selected and adapted for operational use. Again, some adjustments we've not had available on previous generations of cutter bars, and some adaptations or some settings which are only available on that on CONVIO and CONVIO Flex cutter bars. These settings should then give you, the operator, a good idea of how to set up and change the settings for your CONVIO and your CONVIO flex cutter bars.